Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Governance Committee of Council to order. It's July 8th, 2024. I'm Councillor Debbie Sharma and will serve as the chairperson today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. Joining me here, the committee is Councillor Janice Lukes, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Matt Allard, members of the administration. We have our City Clerk, Mr. Carlos Gamero, and our Deputy City Clerk, Mr. Andrew Portress. We have minutes from the last meeting. My mind 1:30. We also have Councillor Cindy Gilroy on this committee. Councillor Allard, will you move that the minutes of the meeting held on April 18th, 2024 be taken as read and confirmed?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary? That's carried. We have one delegation today, Mr. David Grant, to be heard with respect to the amendment to the Members' Code of Council Code of Conduct, Bylaw 19 of 2018, Report 2. Mr. Grant, are you with us? That's the only delegation we have today. Just waiting for him to log on.
Says he's joining, but I don't see him.
I don't think the delegation's able to log on. Okay. Not working. Okay, we'll go to the item 1. The report is the 2023 Councillors Ward Allowance Audit. Would we bring the auditor up at this time?
Yes.
Yeah, we could. Okay, so 2023 Councillors Ward Allowance Audit. And we do have a, yes, Mr. Clerk, if you would do that.
Sure. So as the committee is aware, the Councillors Ward Allowance Fund Policy requires that 5 councillors be randomly selected annually for an auditing of their CW expenses. The city clerks conducted a random draw on February 26th of this year, and Councillors Gilroy, Eady, Sharma, Orlico, and Lukes were selected. The policy further requires that an external auditor be engaged to conduct the audit and submit a report with the results of it to its July meeting, to council rather, through Governance Committee in July. And as in previous years, the City of Winnipeg engaged KPMG as the external auditor for this purpose. And joining us today is Mustafa Osman from KPMG, who is here to answer any questions that the committee may have on the report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. Mr. Osman, if you could please come forward and join us. Thank you for being here in person today at City Hall. I'm happy to see that it's a clean audit for all of the members that were selected this year. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Would you like to run us through some highlights and a summary?
Yes, thank you so much. So we have audited the Councillors Ward Allowance and Chairperson Expenditures Report, as mentioned, for the following 5 wards: Daniel McIntyre, Minarski, Old Kildonan, River Heights, and Waverly West. The audit opinion is clean for the 5 councillors. We have only noted one point. We call it like an observation, and it's included in the audit finding report. It's not related to specific councillor. It's related to the CWA fund policy. We'll go through it kindly after I give a little bit of highlights on the audits. So the materiality for this year is 1,182 compared to 883 last year. The materiality is based on 1% of the average expenses for the 5 councillors. During this year, similar to last year, we have covered 100% of the salaries of the councillors' assistants, and a sample was selected to cover the unexpended fund carried over to 2024 expenses not recorded in the correct accounting period, donation receipt issued in the councillor's name, and ineligible expenses treated as eligible expense. Based on the audit work performed, no discrepancies were found, and we found no instances of non-compliance with the CWA fund policy. Regarding the observations that was mentioned, is mainly regarding the unexpended fund carried over to 2024. So back in March, 23rd of March, 2023, there was some update in CWA fund policy regarding the fund allocation, and there were 3 brackets. And those 3 brackets are staffing, general expenses, and word office meeting space. So we noted that the policy did not clearly specify that the carryover of an expended fund should be calculated based on the above 3 categories. And we noted that from the period from 1 January to 31st March, 10% of the fund was calculated during that period. And for the period from 1st April to 31st December, the allocation was based on 10% of the 3 brackets. So we discussed this matter with the city clerks, and we were informed that they will look at the policy and they will do the required amendments.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, relative to the 10% that you're mentioning, we didn't have a specific policy or have it outlined, but we did exactly what you're recommending, and we can certainly look at formalizing that in the future. You are correct in saying that last year we had a change in the allotment to the CWA, and there was 3 buckets that were subsequently created. So we'll certainly look at that in the coming months if we want to finalize that recommendation. I think it would make sense.
Thank you.
Any questions? You've been doing the audit for several years now. We appreciate your diligence.
Thank you.
And I think the fact that we have a randomly selected sample is a good thing. All counselors are on alert. We're following the policy, and we kind of never know when we're going to be selected. So I'm happy to see the clean audit here today as the chair of this committee.
Thank you so much.
Questions? No, I think
Everything's good.
that sums everything up. Okay.
Kindly allow me to thank the city clerk, deputy city clerk, and the finance departments and the councillors for all the support during the audit. They made it so smooth during this audit, similar to the prior years. Thank you.
Thank you. I echo that. There's a lot of work and checks and balances that we have, Mr. Clerk. Our assistants, city clerk's department, then on to finance. So we are trying to be very good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. That's the goal here. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Could I speak for a moment?
Mr. Grant, I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Gilroy.
That item.
Okay. Councillor Gilroy moves item 1. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary, that's carried. This will appear on the council agenda as a communication piece. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, it was up PPC and then up to the council.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go back to our delegation if that's okay with the committee. Okay, Mr. Grant, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you here today. I do want to note the item you're speaking about, the amendment to the members of Code of Council conduct bylaw. It is on the agenda. We're going to be asking for an extension today, so we can take a look at this further.
Good.
So you want to talk about it?
Would you like to speak to it today?
Yes, I would. Yeah, it was unusual to not be admitted to be admitted mid-meeting, but thank you. And
Put you in earlier and it wasn't working for some reason.
oh yeah, that's fine. Anyway, these are just general comments, and I'm very much in favor of the report, the audit report. When considering council's ethics rules, one must realize that this process was once just to provide specific advice for members of council. It still does that. As this process emulates the ethics processes of other bodies, it investigates and reports. That's good and better. As it does these things, the exemptions and blackout periods could become problematic. This item suggests some good changes to the bylaw. On the other hand, it fails to make other changes that some suggest are needed. Since complaints are not just deterrents, but also intended to educate, they should be investigated and reported throughout every year. Investigating a complaint that's submitted long after the alleged event can still be educational. I'm reminded of Manitoba's Bill 36. It limits the secret dismissal of complaints. It had a very high priority in cabinet because those secret deals can do harm, and they knew the rules had to change. Any regulator of professionals and any ethics process whose rules enable completely secret dismissals and have narrow reporting windows may be skating on thin ice. I'm working with the minister and his staff on the next steps beyond Bill 36 because Minister Azaguara and the Justice Minister both agree that there is need for improvement in their laws. For this reason, all complaints should be investigated. The redaction might be needed to protect the innocent, obviously, but such investigation should not automatically be dismissed. The best way to do this involves publishing the reasons, which Ms. Walsh already does, and investigating every complaint, which the rules currently prevent her from doing. Just want to make those points because there is a parallel movement at the legislature on improving stuff there with their ministers. And again, thank you very much for granting me the time.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Appreciate your presentation today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
We're going to item 3, Mr. Clerk.
Item 2.
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
item 2, yes. So item 2, committee, amendment to the members of council code of conduct bylaw. Councillor Gilroy, you'll move an extension for up to 60 days.
So moved.
Thank you, and we'll take a look at this. All in favor?
Aye.
Contrary, that's carried. Next item, final item, item 3, annual report to the Integrity Commissioner for the period January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. I'd like to call forward our Integrity Commissioner, Ms. Sherry Walsh, who's with us here today to present her report.
You do have a preference as to where I sit?
The end would be great.
End, in the middle?
And it's best.
The end?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes we've gone to the middle.
I think we have sat in the middle actually last time. Does
We
that
did
work
the
as well?
last time. Yeah.
Carry up to the committee.
Okay.
Yeah. Just for the camera view.
Can I move this without interfering with anything?
Yep.
Okay,
Get that over.
good. That's fine. Thank you.
Ms. Walsh, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm pleased to present my annual report for the period January 1st to December 31st, 2023. The Integrity Commissioner's role is an integral part of the accountability, the relatively new ethics and accountability framework that Council established dating back to 2017 when it created this role and appointed me to perform it. And of course, one of my first role or tasks was to work with Council to prepare a new code of conduct. The preamble to that code says that a written code of conduct demonstrates that members of Council share a common understanding of the ethical obligations which are essential to the fair and effective operation of government. But of course, a shared understanding of ethical values doesn't just happen by accident. So by setting out specific rules of conduct, the code gives members a roadmap, if you will, to follow when performing their duties of office, ensuring that at all times they put the public's interest before their own. As Integrity Commissioner, a few things about this role. I take a proactive approach to promoting a culture of ethical conduct, focusing on education and advice as a means of promoting compliance with the code. In performing my work, I strive to avoid politicization of my office and to respect the distinction between ethical issues which engage the code and issues which are of a political nature and should therefore be left to be addressed by the voters at the ballot box. In assessing the efficacy of my work, I look at how well members understand their ethical obligations and how willing they are to engage with my office. And I will say that in the 7 years that I have been in this role, generally, members have developed, I think, a greater understanding of how to perform their duties of office in a way that complies with the code. And in all of my dealings with the members during the period covered by this report, I found them to be respectful and fully cooperative with my office. I continue to have an excellent working relationship with the Office of the City Clerk and his staff, and I am grateful for the relationship of trust and respect that exists between our respective offices. And I also want to acknowledge the work of my now former colleagues, Ryan Nurbis, an associate lawyer in my office, and my former assistant, Carol Dugan. So going through the report, as always, I start with discussing the advisory role that I perform. As I've often said, the Integrity Commissioner's advisory role is, I think, the most important aspect of the role. I think it's the most effective when it comes to promoting a culture of integrity. And members are always encouraged to seek advice from me on a proactive basis to ensure they comply with their obligations under the code before they act. In the period covered by this report, I received 17 requests from members who sought my advice on a variety of topics. I responded to each request within 24 to 48 hours. Advice was provided by phone, in writing, in person, or by video conference. And then in my report, as is my usual practice for these reports, I set out some examples of, in an anonymized fashion, of requests for advice that I received and the advice that I provided. As I note in the report, it's somewhat difficult to identify many of the requests for advice because doing that would also identify who's requested it. And the ability to maintain a confidential advisory relationship with the members of council is key to the effectiveness of my role. But I have given you some examples of the types of requests for advice that I received in the report. For example, several members asked before going into a briefing meeting with senior administration where they were going to be discussing litigation. Several members asked whether I thought they would need to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and I told them that because the type of information they were going to receive fell within the definition of confidential information that was in the rules in the code, that would be covered by that rule, their obligation, and they wouldn't have to sign anything in addition in order to ensure that they maintained confidentiality. I've also given you an example of a request for advice about a gift, whether a member could accept the gift, and if so, what they could do with it. And an example of advice a member sought prospectively before publishing their community information bulletin. And again, I was glad to see that request for advice because it gave me an opportunity to discuss the types of expressions that are appropriate. In this case, one of the things that the member wanted to publish was information about an open house being held by a local food bank. And I said, of course, that's precisely the kind of thing that a member of council should talk about activity in their ward. And the other was proposed wording about a project being undertaken in the member's ward where the member wanted to comment about the extent to which they believed a previous council member had made an impact. And when I looked at the proposed wording, I determined that there was nothing in it that violated the code, that in particular would constitute harassment under the code, and that it was an expression of opinion, a political opinion that the member was entitled to express, and it was done in a way that did not violate the code. But I was glad that the member thought about seeking my advice before simply publishing the matter. I also comment about advice that I sent out to all members of council. As you know, from time to time, I will send the same letter or email to all of you. This was in anticipation of the last provincial election, just reminding you that members and their staff are not to use the influence of their office to carry out activities to support or oppose a political party or candidate, including fundraising. In the context of any election at any level of government. In doing that, though, I was very clear to say that as private citizens, of course, any member of council was entitled to support any candidate. They just had to be careful that they were doing that in their personal capacity and not as a member of council. And that email prompted a number of council members to ask my advice about the way in which they intended to support a candidate. And I was very impressed with the diligence with which members sought my advice on that topic. And again, as I said, I was very clear to let them know that the code was not intended to restrict their participation in the democratic process. I also note that I published an advisory bulletin, as I do from time to time. If you go on the website, the city's website, the Integrity Commissioner has a page with information about the code and all of the reports that I've published. And advisory bulletins that I publish two council members on how to comply with different aspects of the code. So I did publish one with respect to the rule relating to respectful conduct. Then at page 9, I refer to the complaints process that the Integrity Commissioner conducts. I give you general information about how that process works, and then refer specifically at page 11 to the number of complaints that I received in 2023. I received a total of 21 complaints. 10 of them were formal, 11 were informal. 3 of the informal ones turned into formal complaints. The main difference in how I treat formal versus informal complaints is that I will not consider conducting an investigation of a complaint unless it's presented in a formal way. Doesn't mean that I won't look at resolving it, but short of an investigation, but I will not even consider whether to conduct an investigation unless it's been submitted as a formal complaint. I note that 4 of the formal complaints that I received in 2023 arose out of litigation where it was a matter of public record. There were lawyers in my previous office where I was at the time who had acted for one of the parties. And so those complaints I referred out to the Integrity Commissioner for Edmonton. I've had no involvement with how those complaints are dealt with. She will report to me on the resolution of them. And I expect that that will be the subject of the annual report for 2024. One of the formal complaints filed in 2023 was withdrawn before I had an opportunity to assess it. And another was resolved with the participation of the respondent member without the need to conduct an investigation after the member publicly acknowledged their misconduct. And I do get into that a little bit more later in the report. 2 of the formal complaints that I received in 2023, I determined would result in investigations, and I did conduct investigations of those reports, and I will report on them in 2024. Both of those investigations have been completed. And then, as always, I've given you some summaries of anonymized examples of how I applied the code in assessing complaints and determining whether or not to investigate them. So I've given you some examples throughout the report. The one complaint that I said was a formal complaint that was resolved without investigation involved, you'll see at page 15, I talk about the fact that the individual made a Facebook post where they used the term drug addicted zombies, and I determined when I received a complaint about that was something that the type of conduct that would engage the code as part of the process. The respondent member was given an opportunity to provide a written reply. And in that written reply, they readily acknowledged that they ought not to have used that term, and they apologized for it. I then met in person with the member to discuss why the term was not appropriate and was not in compliance with the code. And I felt that they understood that. They then also made a public apology at the next council meeting. And based on all of that, I determined that there was nothing further I needed to do with respect to the complaint. I always talk about the fact that the complaint process is remedial, not punitive, and the point is to educate. And I felt in this case that the respondent understood their obligations. I then talk about my communications with the public and outreach activity. In 2023, I was contacted on 18 occasions by members of the public, asking sometimes about things that are not within my jurisdiction, things that relate to public services. Sometimes people ask me my opinion about the conduct of a member, and I will not give an opinion about something that could be the subject of a complaint, but I will answer general questions about how the code applies or what a specific section means. I had discussions with the provincial ombudsman about some of my processes. I did last summer in June of 2023, I did a presentation to the senior management team at the request of the CAO on the topic of the council staff relationship. And the meeting presented a very good opportunity to engage with the public services directors. And as I note in the report, I was very gratified to hear at that meeting the directors say that since this role of the Integrity Commissioner has been put in place and the code has been enhanced, the relationship between the public service and council has improved. I also did a presentation to council, an education session to all members of council that was very well attended at the end of last year. And again, that provided an opportunity for a very constructive and lively dialogue. And a copy of the PowerPoint slides that were presented at that session is actually posted on my page, I say the Integrity Commissioner's page on the city website. And just to confirm, although that page is on the city's website, the content of that page is completely controlled by me. So it remains independent in that way. In November of last year, I met with the members of the governance committee to discuss recommendations. I was proposing to amend the code, and those amendments have been working their way through the process and hopefully will be approved in 2024. I was asked to do presentations to a number of post-secondary institutions, both in Ontario and in Manitoba, in particular in Manitoba to the third year course at the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Law. Throughout the period, I engaged in regular dialogue and consultation with municipal integrity and ethics commissioners from other jurisdictions across Canada and with the province of Manitoba's ethics commissioner, Jeffrey Schnur. And through this network, I'm advised that the provisions of Winnipeg's code are often looked to with approval by municipalities in other jurisdictions. I've set out the use of the budget that has been established for the Integrity Commissioner since the role was created in 2017 is $125,000, and I used up $93,000 of that budget, which represents 471 hours of services. The last area to comment on is the Voluntary Lobbyist Registry. The mandate for the role of the Integrity Commissioner when it was created was to have oversight over the Voluntary Lobbyist Registry. And I'm available to answer questions both from members of the public or the public service or members of council about how the registry works. It is important to recognize that lobbying is a legitimate and important aspect of public life in a liberal democracy. But to enhance the public's confidence in the integrity of its elected officials and its public service, lobbying activity must not be associated with secrecy and undue influence. And that's why even a voluntary lobbyist registry is an important component of a municipality's accountability framework. And I've set out for you a history of the registration since the registry was created in 2018. In 2023, 5 additional lobbyists registered their activity for a total since it was first created of 46 lobbyists having registered. So I want to conclude by noting that enforcing and upholding the standards that are set out in the code requires vigilance and an ongoing commitment, not only from members of council, but also from members of the public and of the public service. And I want to thank all of the individuals, the members of the public service and council who engaged with my office during the last year in pursuit of promoting a healthy democratic process for the city of Winnipeg. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh. Thank you for being here with us today in person. It's always great to have this annual report, but you're also no stranger to this committee or council. There's a lot of ongoing dialogue between this council, as you noted. We'll now have some questions and comments. Councillor Gilroy.
Yes, at the recent council meeting, we had a councillor that did an apology, and I said, I think this is the first time in council, and everyone kind of corrected me that it wasn't the first time in council. So just overall this year, how many times has there been an apology from a councillor or action that has warranted an apology or anything like that as of
So
Now, just further to that, that was a specific report this time, and there has been reports in the past.
yes, although the reports in the past, they were from a different integrity commissioner, because again, the matter related to something that my previous office was involved in, but that one was not in relation to a formal investigation report with a finding of a breach. So really the one that came before council at the end of June was the first one of that nature to find a formal breach. Of course, so that's 2024. And so far as I can recall, there has been one other opportunity in 2024 where a council member made a public apology after discussing with me how to resolve a matter. looking at 2023, which is the period covered by this report, I think the apology that we're discussing, that I've referenced in this report, is the only public apology that involved intervention from my office. So there was really one in 2023. And so far in 2024, there have been two. One is the result of a complaint, a formal complaint that was informally resolved. And one is the result of a formal complaint, which resulted in an investigation report finding a breach. And that was the recommended sanction, which council determined would be the appropriate sanction.
Now, there has been some other apologies on the floor, and perhaps that was in conversation with you as well. Not a formal report, but there have been some other apologies on occasion.
Yes,
Yes.
so, yes, typically though, they've been in response to a complaint. And as I said in this report, if I feel, and I mean, I know that, I mean, an apology has to be to be effective. It has to be genuine. It has to be unqualified. It can't be an apology, but from my perspective, if I determine, if I get a formal complaint and decide that it is something I'm going to investigate, for me to determine that there's nothing further that I need to do, not only do I need to, see the council member do something like a formal apology on the floor of council in an effective and meaningful way, but I also have had to satisfy myself by meeting with the individual that they understand why their conduct failed to meet the expectations in the code, and why they're making an apology. And if I'm satisfied with that, as I said, this is supposed to be an educational process, then I will determine, that there isn't anything further. The public interest isn't benefited by my continuing with an investigation and a report, because of course, all of that uses public resources. And, the process is not supposed to be about blaming and shaming. It's supposed to be about educating. So if I'm satisfied that a member has, understood what, they should have done differently, then I feel that the purpose of the code has been satisfied.
Thank you. Any further questions at this time?
No, no questions. Can I make a comment?
Yes.
No, I just think that this is very, very helpful for counselors. I think that having an integrity commissioner, having these reports, being able to have someone to just seek advice from a constant sort of perspective is very beneficial for everyone. So I just want to thank you for your efforts, and thank you, Madam Chair, for making sure we keep in line.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. We definitely need to work in collaboration with the Integrity Commissioner, whose advice, by the way, is sought across the country. We're one of the first cities that have established this role, and there's others, and I think there's a lot of back and forth that Ms. Walsh has with her counterparts, but definitely a lot of advice that she imparts and shares with others. So with that, I'll ask you to stand down and we'll deal with the item. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lukes, I'll pass the chair to you, if I may. And just for the public record, we've heard the annual report of the Integrity Commissioner for the period of January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2024. I'd like to first join my committee members by thanking Ms. Walsh for serving as the Integrity Commissioner for the City of Winnipeg and for always being available for two members of council. I'd like to thank members of this governance committee who meet regularly with the Integrity Commissioner to review the code and other matters that pertain to this position. Each of these meetings have been collaborative and productive. This annual report provides a summary of the work Ms. Walsh has performed in the previous year. This work includes responding to and investigating complaints, bringing forward amendments to the members of council code of conduct, and providing advice to members of council. In 2023, Ms. Walsh received 17 requests from members of council seeking advice on a number of topics. And as indicated in her report, each request was responded to within a 24 to 48 hour period. And that's super important for us because things are very timely. They're in front of us and we're looking for that advice in a short time frame. So we appreciate that diligence on her part. The report provides a few examples of the advice sought throughout the year. And I'd like to remind all members of council that Ms. Walsh is here to provide advice. Please don't hesitate to reach out to her. and she's here for that purpose. Thank you again, Ms. Walsh, for the important work that you do on behalf of the citizens of Winnipeg and members of council. We appreciate your dedication. Councillor Lukes, with that, I will move this report
Okay,
on to Executive Policy Committee and a vote in council.
all right. Thank you very much for your comments. Committee members, any comments, additional comments? No? All right. So I'll call the question. All in favor?
I
Carried.
will take the chair back and Councillor Allard moves adjournment.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Contrary, that's carried.